Hi everyone, it's Mark from New Life Guitars here, coming to you on a beautiful Friday morning here in Brisbane, Australia. And I've just wanted to have a chat for a little while about the subject of tuning, and particularly tuning classical guitars. Now, tuning is a thing that's very close to our heart as musicians, because we always want to sound in tune, we want to play in tune, we want our instruments to be in tune. But tuning is a very complicated formula. There's a lot goes into tuning, a lot of factors that affect tuning, and we're just going to talk about that today, and just how to get the best tuning, or what they call intonation, which is the word for tuning. So the word intonation means the capacity or the ability of an instrument to be tuned, or notes to be in tune. So there's many factors that go into it. So obviously the quality of your instrument, and the many issues that can be part of your instrument that are built into the instrument itself. The quality of the strings that you play, they have an effect on intonation. And then also your technique is a very important factor when it comes to intonation. The way that you play the guitar is very important. So we're going to cover all those sorts of factors today. And I'll try not to make the clip too long, but I do want to go into a little bit of detail with this just to get the best out of it. So if you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you're watching this on my Facebook page, then hopefully you're a follower. Feel free to follow if you like, and like the video there as well. So the first thing we need to talk about is just the nature of tuning itself. So many of us just assumed that tuning is simply a mathematical reality, that all the notes are all related to each other, their frequencies are divided up into natural occurring harmonics and divisions that mean that every single note has an empirical mathematical formula applied to it. And while that's partly true, it's not actually true. If we just start on one note, say A110, take that up to A220, A440, that's our octaves, and that's the frequency is 110 Hertz, 220, 440 Hertz. And when we play a note has many harmonic fundamentals built into it that stack up on top of each other, and that they are actually mathematically related. So the ratio between the first note of the scale, A, and E, which is the fifth note, that relationship is 3:2. So if we take that A to E there, that's A220, that E is actually 330. So that's a ratio of 3:2. So we can then extrapolate those ratios for each note in the scale, and we arrive with a set of tones and frequencies. But the problem arises if we start on a different note, like for example the C sharp, or the third that relates to that A note that we just played. It has a different relationship to the F sharp note when the relationship is a perfect fifth. So without going into all the detail on what they call just tuning and equal temperament tuning, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment, but there are inaccuracies that are actually built in, because if we start our formulas at different notes, we end up with different frequencies. So C sharp in relation to A will be different to the C sharp in relation to F sharp. And in fact, it'll be out by somewhere like 14 or 17 cents or something like that. So a cent is 1/100th of a semitone. So our semitones, and in fact on a guitar, the fret distances account for a semitone. So semitones are divided into 100 intervals, so little tiny little steps of 100. So that's when I talk about cents, that's what I'm talking about. So what historically, to overcome that inaccuracy that occurred in nature, then the inventors of instruments and people that needed to were invested in the tuning of orchestras and all the other instruments, had to come up with methodologies for trying to compensate for those inaccuracies. Because if you tune an instrument simply to all the exact mathematical notes based off that A 440 or the A220, then it will sound in tune for many of the notes, but then other notes, when they're combined together, will be glaringly out of tune. So tuning is really just a means of coping with those inaccuracies as best they can. So the most common tuning methodology that they came up with, and this is centuries ago, was what they call equal temperament. So that is where they simply take a note, A, take its octave, and then simply divide the octave into 12 equal steps to give you semitones. So even though on a guitar scale the frets don't look like they're equal, they are actually equal in terms of the actual tone, because each time you move down the neck, the scale length gets shorter. So the fraction of that scale that you're dividing becomes smaller and smaller, hence the frets get closer together. So that means that all the notes are then simply exactly the same distance apart frequency-wise. So that means that there are inbuilt inaccuracies into the equal temperament system, and that's just the way it is. So in Western music, it's pretty much all equal tempered instruments playing. That's whether it's pianos, guitars, or anything that's got a fixed methodology for being able to play the note. Other stringed instruments like violins and cellos and violas, those sort of things, where they don't have frets, you do have variation where you can vary the pitch subtly with your finger positioning so that you can get other sorts of intonation happening. So that means that no matter how good your guitar is, it could be the most spectacularly accurate guitar ever created, it will still have those fundamental inaccuracies built into the pitch. And the interval between the 1 and the 5 is very close. It's less than 2 cents out. But when you come to the interval of the third, which is that lovely sweet kind of, the third is actually tuned sharp. It's usually about 14 cents sharp. So 14 cents is quite discernible by the ear. Most people with good pitch can actually hear 2 or 3 cents out. So that is quite a distance. But our ears, right from birth, have been accustomed to Western style music, where our ears generally accommodate the out of tuneness that occurs in Western music. And we may think it's a gift to have perfect pitch and to have really good hearing, but it's actually something of a curse if you have really, really good hearing. And one of my daughters has perfect pitch. And the thing is, if you've got perfect pitch, everything will tend to sound out of tune to you. So she could hear music on the radio and it will sound out of tune. She can hear an instrument and it will sound out of tune no matter how tuned it is. And she does happen to play cello, which means that she's able to use her pitch to good ends in terms of that aspect of her playing. But having great pitch, while it's an asset to be able to tune, if you don't really want to have perfect pitch, because it's one of those things that once you hear it, it's hard to unhear it. So then we get into the psychology of tuning as well, which is another thing. If I have time, I'll just quickly talk about that. So once we understand, okay, we have limitations on our instruments that we can't do much about, that's just the reality of the science of tuning. And then we come to our instruments are built, and hopefully the builder has made them as accurately as possible. So when we think about a guitar, the scale length runs between the leading edge of the nut and the leading edge, the front edge of the saddle. And then the scale is divided up into semitones via the frets. So if a guitar is well made and the scale lengths are accurate, then the distance from that leading edge of the nut to the middle of the 12th fret should be exactly the same distance as from the middle of the 12th fret to the leading edge of the saddle. So that means the scale, because simply the octave is exactly the same when it's split in half. So that sort of makes sense. So then all your other frets, providing they're installed accurately, will simply have the out of tuneness, which is just part of the nature of equal tempered instruments. Now, it is possible that sometimes guitars are not made as accurately as possible. I've had guitars where the bridge has been slightly mounted in the wrong position, which means that that center point is not exactly center, so you've got a different scale length from the 12th fret to the saddle. So sometimes there's a little bit you may be able to do about that. As you know, on electric guitars and steel string guitars, the saddle is slanted that way because of the tension of the strings. Then the scale length on the low E string is slightly longer than the scale length on the high E string. And the reason for that is that the stiffness of steel strings on a steel string guitar or an electric guitar, the tension of the string is so stiff that when the string vibrates, it doesn't actually vibrate from the leading edge of the saddle. The stiffness of the string means that that first millimeter or a couple of millimeters of the string does not actually move. So the string, once there's enough torsional relaxation in the string for it to begin moving, it actually puts the scale length forward a little bit by a millimeter or a couple of millimeters, so that it then starts vibrating from that point forward. So hence the bridge and the saddle can be compensated to allow for that particular aspect and that particular quality in the strings for it to then be set to the exact same scale length that is most accurate for that particular instrument. Now, on a nylon string guitar, it's a very different kettle of fish because the strings are softer and more supple. They do tend to vibrate right from the leading edge of the saddle. So that means that when you look at a classical guitar, you notice that the saddle is parallel to the nut. It's not compensated like that. That's why you can't put steel strings on a classical guitar, apart from the fact that they've got a lot more tension or probably damage or destroy your guitar. They'll be terribly out of tune. And I've gone to people's places to look at a guitar, and they've somewhere in the history of the guitar they put steel strings on it, and they've wondered why it doesn't tune very well, and that sounds terrible, not to mention the fact that it's probably bowing the top and at risk of pulling the bridge off. So that's just one of the factors of classical guitar. So depending on the width of the saddle, so what can you do about it? That's what I was going to say next. What can you do about it to try to improve the intonation on your classical guitar? So when I set up a guitar, or when I've restored it or refretted it or whatever, when I put the strings on and the strings have settled in, you can check the intonation traditionally in that you compare the harmonic to the fretted 12th fret. If that note's a little bit sharp, depending on the width of the saddle, standard guitar, classical guitar saddles are usually 2.5 millimeters, but they can be 3.5. Even wider sometimes, or they can be narrower. This one is just on 2 millimeters, which is just how some makers like to use, particularly back in the days. This is a 1966 built guitar, so it was back in the 60s, made in Japan. It's actually a beautiful guitar, Hiroshi Tamura. But if you've got a little bit of width in your saddle, you can file in compensations to try to increase the scale length between the 12th fret and the leading edge of the saddle. So that can buy you maybe up to 10, 15 cents, something like that. Now there's a little mathematical formula that applies to this as well, that if at the 12th fret, as I was saying earlier, that the semitone is divided into 100 cents. So the distance between the 12th fret and the 11th fret is usually about 17 millimeters. So that means to get 10 cents worth of change in the pitch, it means that you would just divide 17 by 10, and then you would end up with 1.7 millimeters. So 1.7 millimeters is equal to about 10 cents of pitch. So that means if you've got a saddle that's 2.5 millimeters wide, you can scoop back the leading edge of the saddle. If you take that back, say 2 millimeters, then you'll approximately get about 17 to 20 cents of lowering of the pitch of the string. If that scale length increases by that distance, by say 2 millimeters, and then you'll get technically 20 cents of flattening of that particular note. Now in the real world you don't usually get that amount, but it is a way that if you've got a little bit of sharpness in your notes, then compensating the saddle can help just give you a little bit more relief in terms of that pitch issue if it sounds sharp when you're playing up the neck. So that's a little bit you can do there, which is helpful. I notice that a lot of the saddles that are being made these days unfortunately have a compensation built in. So it's like the makers of the saddle think that they're meant to be like a steel string guitar, so they're actually slanted back a bit, which is not helpful for a classical guitar, because classical guitars don't behave like steel string guitars. Steel string guitars, each string is a lower gauge. It might start, say, at 56 thou, and it goes to 13 thou, and it kind of steps down in the diameter of the string. But on classical guitars, the G string can be as thick as the E string or the A string. So the whole rationale for compensating a saddle like that doesn't really exist on a classical guitar. So that's just a little sideline.